everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Most Important Conversations. I am joined by my colleague and co-host, Jenna. Jenna, how you doing today?
Good.
Good.
We have a topic we're ready to go on.
We are. We were just commiserating. It's important to commiserate. If you don't commiserate on a daily basis, you're missing out on a really fantastic aspect of life, a great experience. Always commiserate. And we were just commiserating. We were talking about, I'm just going to throw the topics out because they're kind of like puzzle pieces. We were talking about trust. We were talking about belief. We were talking about choice. And these are some pretty profound topics when you start to peel them back and start to look under the surface, especially in the context of relationships, sex, relationships, intimacy, all of this sort of thing. You know, when you think about it, it's like, I believe you. I believe what you're telling me. I believe what you're showing me. I believe how you're showing up in the world. I believe that to be who you are. And it's outside of myself. It's like me observing you and I'm believing you. And then I trust you. What is trust? Can you give it? Can you take it away? Is it conditional? These are things you and I were just talking about before we kind of started today. And then where does choice factor in all of this? What is the power of choice? So I don't even know where you want to start, Jenna, but I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of kick off a bit of a frame around this as it pertains to relationships. I mean, pick belief, trust, or choice. What's most interesting? And we'll just riff.
I think where we were having a conversation around the belief not being based on the need for the external validation in order to believe the belief. So, right. Where did that go with relationship? And that is self-relationship as well, right? So how we're relating to ourselves and then how people will show up in the world because of that belief, but that's secondary. So what's an example in a relationship context of, let's say like someone's going on their first date, they're divorced, they're getting back into the dating world and they have trust issues. So they're going to be intersecting with all of these. I have trust issues. So you might look for the red flags and be looking to validate your belief. And then that person might be completely trustworthy, but because you've now seen all of these red flags, you're only seeing what you've decided to believe. You know, you're projecting your beliefs onto this person, even if they're actually different. And even if they actually are trustworthy. The flip side, someone could have trust issues, but then be like, they self-abandon and they go, let me give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, well, maybe he was busy. Well, and then they make excuses for people and then they abandon their deeper belief. Like I need to discern and watch out of a fantasy of like, maybe I can trust this guy. I don't really trust men, but maybe I can trust this guy and maybe I'll make excuses for them. So that's what we're talking about is the big hot mess of needing the external reality to feel internally powerful or safe or whatever word we want to use. And that dance is what we're talking about. So those are some examples I could think of with dating. How it shows up.
And relationships. Yeah, no, I think the crux of the matter is we as human beings choose to stay in so everything in our life, whether our listeners believe this or not, I want you to kind of just bear with us and kind of run with this for a second. Everything in our life is a choice if we choose it to be a choice. Okay. Let that sit in for a second. What do I mean by that? Well, I can choose to allow the external world, the people, the circumstances, the situations to govern and to determine what my life looks like, which incidentally, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, I believe that's what most people do. And I think that that's the case simply because we were taught to do that when we were younger. So when you're a child, your whole world revolves around the external actions of your parents. Where you live, what you eat, what your day looks like, what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do, all of this stuff is externally determined by someone else called your parents. And so we learn very quickly that who I am in the world is determinative on other people, other circumstances, other situations. So all of us have, with maybe a few exceptions, not been taught how to be standing in our own power as the creator of our life, where we are at choice for everything, but rather what we believe are our choices is really a false choice when we're coming from a place of needing something external to choose from. Like everything in our brain, our brain likes to reduce things down to a binary, right? So there could be a million things that you could choose, but we only see in twos. I went to there's a famous sales trainer by the name of Tom Hopkins, who's considered one of the top sales trainers in the world. And he teaches people that this is how people think. So he says, if you're giving people a quote unquote choice, it's really a false choice because you're not truly at choice. If you're a salesman giving someone choice, say you're selling cars, oh, do you like this car or that car? Oh, I like this car. Okay, would you like to come in Tuesday or Thursday to sign the paperwork? And people will naturally just drop right into choice means a binary, right? There's only two options. So we relate that to most things. And so we've grown up in this situation. We've been taught and conditioned in a situation where our life is determined by the external variables and factors around which we're told we have choice, but we ever only are limited in the options available to us because we're looking outside of ourselves. The thing you and I were talking about is that when we truly understand that everything in our life, everything is our choice, if we choose to be, so here's choice number one. Do you choose to allow your life to be directed by external circumstances and conditions? Or do you choose to be the creator of your life, whereby you say, I'm going to determine who I am, and therefore by determining who I am determines who comes into my life, what my relationship is to them, the nature of that relationship. I have choice on all of it, right? Now, choice, I think, is where it starts, because choice, then our beliefs are a choice. So if I'm interested in someone in a relationship, what I believe about them is a choice. Now, you might say, well, no, what I believe about them is determined by how they show up. Not the case, though, because if they show up the way they're going to show up, the choice you have is to determine, well, how am I perceiving them? Like, am I bringing the past, like you were just saying, and projecting it onto this person? Or am I truly allowing this person to show up without any sort of prior conditions in my mind about who they are and how they are and all this stuff?
The curiosity being a
being
necessary
curious,
component.
right, exactly. And then the next thing that follows my belief about something is whether I'm going to choose, also a choice, to trust it. Right? So trust is something that, I hate this saying, trust is earned. Like, you have to earn my trust. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Because what that's saying is external variables are determining whether I choose in my own autonomy to trust someone or not. I believe that trust is given. There's a social contract or agreement that's negotiated in relationship. And if those terms are adhered to and are violated in some way, that doesn't necessarily mean that, so the conditions of our relationship were broken, but it doesn't mean I can't trust you anymore. That's still a choice. I can choose to trust you again. Maybe we have to renegotiate the conditions because, they're just not working for us. Fine.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I can never trust you. So, so I've just laid a big landscape. I want you to kind of jump in and opine. So
I want to talk about trust a little bit, because I think that is a nugget that is work withable at this moment within this whole matrix happening. So I look at trust now as I watch who people are being. So how they're showing up and try not to attach anything to it. Oh, okay, they were late. Okay, are they an unreliable person? Don't skip all the way there. Like, noted, data collection. So especially in the beginning. And then when somebody really kind of shows me who they are by who they're choosing to be, leave on time or not, to go to that Starbucks and stand in line and be late because they are whatever. It says, what's cool about this, everyone, is once you start to learn it, I can watch who people are being and then determine how I want to interface with them. I don't need to determine them as a bad person or worthy of love or a good person or all this crap. I can just go, how they're being doesn't really work for me. So that would create conflict if I'm making them be something different so I can be okay. which is a trap a lot of people fall into. But then learning how to relate, it would look like, hey, I notice you do this thing. Do you know that you show up like always 5 minutes late?
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, but like, it's sort of, depending on if I have somewhere to go, like, and they have a conversation with that person about it. But to look at the data. So I don't dole out trust. I watch how people are being. I watch how they are with other people. I'm not looking for something to be wrong. And I'm not looking for evidence that I can't trust them, because that's that belief mechanism we're talking about, which is very ontological based of how we relate to reality creates reality. I don't trust people. Aren't trustworthy. You can't trust people.
That's right.
Oh, well, couldn't trust him because of this. Can't trust that. Like, it's like, look, and here's the evidence. Here is 20 years of evidence, all in, like,
confirmation bias.
Exactly. I use this with my clients. I'm like, imagine your mind that doesn't trust people is like the Aaron Brockovich movie, and they're the corporate bad guys, and they've got all those boxes of discovery, and they're like, here's all the evidence that this is a thing. You can't trust people. And what we're building is this case. We got to rely on synchronicity and living with your heart, but then gathering the data and being smart and applying yourself to it, participating with that belief system to grow it. Because our confirmation bias is going to be so strong because it would have been emotionally branded as well.
Right.
So like, that hurt me. Don't want to be hurt by not trusting someone again. So I'm going to continue to not trust as a protection mechanism.
Well, our confirmation bias becomes our identity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. The people pleasers, the fierce businessman, whatever that is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just laid out a bunch of stuff, but that trust thing, I do consider that a thing. I don't just trust people, but I do have an overarching trust. I'm just going to trust. I'm going to walk out my door and not be in a panic, but I watch who people are being. I watch who they're choosing to be.
Yeah.
Based on their behaviors. It's everywhere. You can see it everywhere. Everyone is showing you who they are.
How would you define trust? It's important to look into this, because we use the word, we throw it around, but I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, so if I choose to trust someone before I've had an experience with them, which incidentally is the way that I go about living my life. See, think about it, right? So if I need you to show up first and show me who you are before I determine whether or not I'm going to trust you.
Oh, okay. I determine how much I'm going to interface with them and how I will interface with them.
Which is different. Yeah. Like, different, okay. Yeah. Right. But I think most people are like, trust is an earned thing. So I need to have an experience of you before I determine, before I choose to trust you. Right. Yeah. Which I think is just coming from a trauma response, quite honestly. Yeah, because if you think about little children, they're not thinking that. They're just, I trust you. That's our innate nature. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which has been conditioned out of us.
Yeah. I was like that for too long.
Yeah.
I was in my 20s and just being way too trusting. I remember my friend's boyfriend was like, Jenna's so smart, but she's kind of dumb. Like, she said, I would just trust people and believe the best and like handshake deals, and then learned to watch who people are being.
Well, but here's the thing, right? So let's talk about that. I want to go down this because I think there's going to be a lot of like release for people if they really get this. Let's take it out of romantic or sexual relationships for a second, and let's start talking about other types of human relationships. So let's say business relationships. So in a business relationship, we sign contracts that is supposed to be evidentiary of we are agreeing to trust one another to fulfill these behaviors, actions, terms, etc. But if we really trusted them, we would not sign the contract. We wouldn't need the contract. Their word would be enough. So in effect, a contract is by nature evidentiary of a lack of trust.
It's assuming people are going to suck.
It's assuming you're going to break your word. Which incidentally, humanity has a fabulous track record of doing this, which is, a deeper thing. They break their word because they don't trust themselves. They don't trust others. They think they have a license to be able to break their word. Nothing means anything. There's a whole different conversation going on there. But if we want to reverse this and realize that you don't need a contract. If I need a contract with you to do
Mhm.
business with you, my first question is, why am I doing business with you? Like,
Mhm.
why am I doing business with someone that I already know I don't trust? Therefore, I need them to write down their words so that I can go to the parent, which is the judge, and
Mhm.
say, mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy, so-and-so didn't do what they said they were going to do. See how
Mhm.
childish this is?
Mhm. Mhm.
And even childish that the person who you're supposedly getting into a business contract with doesn't honor their word.
Mhm. I think it can
So
reduce people to a lower state of consciousness in operating systems. Like it can reduce people to looking at that so transactionally versus who do I want to be?
just
What's our
transactionally.
collective outcome? You want your lawn done and I cut the lawn.
Yeah.
Cool. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's just do this. I don't have, like, we don't have a contract. I used to have really, I was taught by an American company. I think it's more in the States. Like there's just very litigious, lots and lots of contracts. But I don't really do, I do agreements with clients. I'm going to do this, you're going to do this. And then we're just clear.
Yeah.
And then we can both show up how we want to show up. And that's important. But like what you're saying is like, that can then reduce people's operating system. I would call it like, well, now I'm going to watch for how many hours you were working. And now I'm going to see if I got my money's worth. And versus let's just both be our best. I'm going to show up this way. You're going to show up that way. That is less common, unfortunately.
It is.
Or
No, it
just
is.
like, let's just both be our best here so that our outcome, our collective decided upon outcome, we're both working towards it somehow.
Right. Yeah. I'm not denying that there isn't a massive evidence for human brokenness in the world. What I'm trying to address
I get it.
is how do we circumvent and transform this? And I think it's like, so a lot of these types of conversations, people are like, oh, it's too philosophical. I just want to deal with what is. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but this stuff is the
So
governing.
practical.
It's so practical because it's determining your operating system. It's
Yeah.
determining everything you're going to go do, but it's operating under the surface of your awareness. And so it's thinking you're not even in the driver's seat. I don't know who wouldn't want to live a life where they aren't in full creative control of what's going on. I mean, I wouldn't want to live that life, but that's how most people are living, right? So I'm thinking like, what is trust? At the end of the day, how do we define it for ourselves in a way that makes sense?
That isn't control. So I think
And it's
what
not
we're having a
control. Yeah.
conversation about is trust versus control. So I just had a client session and she has enough money and then she was like, oh, I need to make enough money for this. So like the stories in her head were like, you need to make money, you need to be productive, beliefs, societal conditioning, family conditioning. I said, oh, okay. So your relationship to money is freedom. So you think if you have enough money, then you can be free.
Mm-hmm.
So she has enough money right now, but she's subscribing. I call it subscribing beliefs. She's subscribing to survival. She's subscribing to, oh my God, I need more. Oh my God, I need more. I'm like,
right.
But right now you have the freedom that you think you'll have if you get the money. So you're in this little trap of your own making that you are volunteering. You're volunteering every time you subscribe to that thought. So,
right.
So it's a perfect example. And I said, okay, so now you're trying to create a plan so you can control the outcome. That's not trust.
No.
Real trust is the ability to be present. That's actually my answer. My ability to be present allows me to trust because I will know what to do, when to do it, and how. I will have all my faculties online without looking for something that's going to hurt me, looking for something to make wrong. That's survival, right? But creation mode, presence, is the fulfillment and the peace. I think that's what her and I talked about. Fulfillment and peace, all here, all right now, already here. That's what we're really talking about. So like to me, trust is presence, like actual presence.
Yeah. And when you're present, how it shows up in terms of how true trust shows up in real life is surrender.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ability to surrender into what is and not trying to control all the variables. Right. So another way to think about it as a metaphor for those of you listening who love somebody, right? You would agree, I'm assuming, that true love is when it's not conditional. It's not based on you doing this at the right time, looking like this at the right time. Showing that's not true love. That's transaction.
100%.
Right? Trust is the same thing.
Yes.
Trust is not based on what the other person does. That's the misnomer, I think, here. This is why I need to have an experience of you before I can trust you makes no sense. Right? Like you trust just like you love. It's unconditional. And then you handle the things along the way
Based
that,
on how things are showing up.
yeah, but you still don't stop loving and you don't stop trusting. Because if we do, we get the world that we're kind of seeing in certain pockets.
Right. And so that I do believe in. So the trust thing was because I was very Disney princessy for so long.
Yeah.
And to learn that, don't pet the tiger because it's cute. Not that I ever did that, but I just really believed, I didn't understand that somebody would manufacture ways to steal from me or lie to me. Like the guy that was, whatever, dating, like the amount that men would lie, it just didn't even occur to me that they would. I would just believe that whatever they said, because the idea of lying didn't make sense to me because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't do it ever, but just the idea of lying in order to get your way, to manipulate your own agenda wasn't in my operating system.
Right. And it's only in their operating system because of trauma.
Yeah.
Fundamentally,
either way,
right?
Even if, and so, so we can like really want the best, but a lot of these tools I find with clients is okay, here's how you need to be a powerful creator in the world. And then also know most people aren't, but don't like have your armor on and all that kind of stuff. Just know how to, navigate in between. Okay, this is how someone's showing up. So now this is how I'm going to behave. That's the maturity aspect. And a lot of what we're talking about is actually being a grown-up in a really awesome way. Being the grown up in order to facilitate what brings you freedom, what brings you play. We were talking about play earlier too. Like, what makes your life full and fulfilling, and your inner grown up can actually facilitate that existence, get you that motorcycle or the paint set or the whatever. But a lot of it's about maturity too. Like choosing. I'm mature enough to choose to do my voice exercises because I want to be a good singer, right? That maturity allows us to play with life on a higher level. Anyway, I'm just adding that in there that between trust and all that kind of stuff, there's a maturity of they hurt my feelings. Like, okay, cool. Who do I want to be today? Do I want to bring that hurt into this day? Or do I want to, can I kind of like, the Etch-a-Sketch thing, like just like shake it off? Okay, cool. That's that. Now who do I want to be today? Learning that's what this whole conversation, learning how to be able to do that makes life really cool again. So we're not dragging hurt along with us and then controlling the world so we don't get hurt. It's kind of boring. Not very fun.
Well, it's kind of boring, but the other thing that I think there's so many things about it that stand out for me. But another one is that, so most of us are in this chronic, from childhood or early life anyway, are in this chronic pattern, this conditioned pattern of how we are reacting to the world. And anything bad that's ever happened to us, bad, right? I actually want to say that most people have not had something truly, truly bad happen to them. A lot have, but a lot of what we call bad is just not getting our way. Right? Now, there's true trauma in the world, but I think part of the issue we're having right now is everything is becoming trauma, and that's going to make nothing becoming trauma at some point, right? So we've got to really be clear on our terms here. And so coming back to the trust conversation, this is antithetical compared to the conversation that's been going on in the culture now for the past, 5, 6, 7 years around boundaries, right? So this whole idea of these are my boundaries. So first of all, what are you fencing in? What wall are you building? Think of it, it's a boundary, right? So you're building this wall. You can't cross this wall. You can't cross this fence. You can't cross this boundary. This is my boundary. I think boundaries, my personal view, maybe you disagree, but I think boundaries are kind of a ridiculous thing. I think knowing yourself and being able to respond according to what's of high integrity and authentic to you from moment to moment is where we want to be. To me, that's powerful, as opposed to setting up some arbitrary boundary that we think is forever, all time going to be relevant, because it won't be.
And so being less mature, right? So on a path, and we talked about this with like people pleasers and women's conditioning with my clients, to learn to not overgive, to learn to not say yes to everything and be accommodating. The boundaries are the training wheels to be like, hey, you get to say no. Like, do you know you can say no? But your point, I was doing a workshop and this woman was, she was really chill and everything. She was saying her sisters, their mom is in the home. They're both taking care of an ailing, very stressful, and different siblings are going to behave different ways. This woman is there taking care of everything. And then the sister has her boundaries. Well, that's my boundary. They're done immaturely. They're done not in an empowering way. Like, boundaries are meant to be ways for you to love both that person and yourself at the same time. I think that's one of my favorite ways of seeing it. Like, hey, this is how this works. So yes, the end goal of what you said of like, let's just interface together creatively and be in communication and be transparent and be curious. And that's all great. But if people are starting with a lot of conditioning that they need to unpack from, the training wheels are, hey,
sure.
Da, 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 da. But to construct it as walls. Permanently, and then this is just what I've decided, and now you need to respect that. That's a different thing.
And I think it's a big thing that's been going on. Like, here's a way to take it out of the hypothetical. Let's look at, like, I don't know, a speed limit sign, right? Mm-hmm. Now, anyone listening, the truth is you don't need a speed limit. Mm-hmm. You, as a driver, do not need a speed limit. The only people who need speed limits are people who are unconscious, not present, or completely drunk or stoned out of their mind, in which case they're not paying attention to the speed limit anyway, so it's useless, right? So you think about a speed limit. What is a speed limit? It's supposed to govern how fast you go to keep everyone safe. Okay, what are we being safe from? Well, you're being safe from people who are going to drive too fast beyond a speed which they're able to control the car, and therefore they would cause an accident. Mm-hmm. So in our mind, we're like, okay, let's set up a boundary called a speed limit so that everyone can be safe. Now, we all know speed limits don't work at all. They don't work. People always go over the speed limit. Everyone knows there's like, I can go 10 over,
you can go 13
over, whatever.
That's why I asked the cop. I'm like, so what's the cutoff?
So as soon as the boundary's in place, human nature is, I wonder how far I can bend that boundary. Where's the real line?
But then the rule followers are going, let's say 80 kilometers an hour. We're both in Canada, but they're going the speed limit. And then the other people are annoyed because they're going the speed limit and they should really be going faster. And then you've got this whole...
It's messy. There was a study done in Germany, and we can relate this to some of the other topics we're talking about in relationships here, because these are just patterns. It doesn't matter what you apply it to. So there was a study done in Germany, so the Autobahn, they don't have a speed limit, right? And do you know that traffic jams, okay, which, by the way, I was flying over a city and I was looking down, and I was looking at all the roads, and you could see the cars at night. It was at night. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Lights and speed limits are like plaque and blockages in the arteries. Like this city is having chronic heart attacks all over the city. Like there's no flow, right? And anyways, that was just an interesting observation, but as sort of a pattern or a metaphor. But traffic jams are caused by speed limits, directly caused by speed limits. You're like, well, how is that the case, right? Because there's this thing that we all humans have, but we have not developed it, or we have not allowed it to develop, which is, this sixth sense, this intuition, this ability to sync up and synchronize. Okay, so when you go into like an EDM nightclub or something like that, we already know that the neurons in our brains within, I think it's something like 60 seconds or less, start to sync and vibrate according to what the beats externally are doing. We sync up with things. What they found is that it's like you see it with fireflies and other, birds and stuff, right? This entrainment, right? And what they found in coming back to Germany with the Autobahn is when you don't have a speed limit, a couple things happen. One, everyone knows there's no speed limit, so they're more responsible with their own presence and their own actions, meaning I'm not going to go faster than I can control the car because it's a free-for-all here. I'm not going to be eating while I'm driving. I'm not going to be doing my makeup while I'm driving. I'm not going to See, the training wheels, the boundaries give us permission to be irresponsible and immature inside the boundary.
Yeah. Within a
Right?
little playground.
Yeah, we're in our
Like,
little
here's the
own
fence.
playground. And so when you don't have the boundary, you have to be, like you were saying, present, responsible, standing in your power. And so what happens in the Autobahn is they don't have traffic jams because the entrainment, the synchronicity happens and everyone just starts to flow. There's no traffic jams. And in cities in North America and elsewhere, we've got all these wonderful boundaries called speed limits, and we deal with nothing all day but traffic jams, congestion, because we've basically given license to everyone to be irresponsible.
And I see that but they say that makes people smaller versions of themselves. Like I realize when I have a lot of rules, I see what I can get away with.
Right.
What can I get away with here? What if I do that? What if I do that? Is that who I want to be? So the maturity is, who do I want to be? And the other maturity is, we're in it together. So the toxic independence, and everyone's in their little boxes in their cars with their rules and with their this. And then it just makes people not great humans.
Right.
I'm not a good human when I'm in traffic. I'm not who I want to be being.
Well, yeah, but it also requires you not to trust. So bringing it back to trust. Now that was a metaphor.
Absolutely.
So let's bring it back to relationships here. We've got the rules. We've set up the boundaries. This is who we are, how we are, what's expected. And as the saying goes, rules were meant to be broken. So boundaries were meant to be broken. It's almost like in the human condition. If you don't have a boundary, if you don't have rules, what are you going to break? Nothing. And so now trust is free flowing. I trust you because I trust you. I trust you because I choose to, not because you've adhered to the arbitrary boundaries we've set up.
Yeah. And then the other phenomenon that we didn't talk about was, when you do see the best in people, this does happen. When you do, I've even said this to people, like, oh, well, you're obviously, and not as a manipulation, but I'm seeing them as how I want to see them. You're obviously you have high integrity. Obviously you And it's not a manipulation, but I'm seeing them as how I want them to be.
Right.
They typically will want to align their behaviors to that version of themselves too. And I do feel this in relationships both ways, when we allow our partner to be the highest version that we see them as. And I think this is the gift of partnership, that they can rise up into that of who they want to be in the first place. And I see this a lot, obviously female sided, with men wanting to rise up, but a lot of women making too many concessions. And then there's this mess, which is a whole other topic. But our ability to see someone as capable is also my definition of love. Like, I see you as capable. I don't see you as someone I need to control or rule or fence or whatever. If I see you as capable, oh, now you've got your entrainment with presence. Like, now you've got all your resources online, So like, I know we just talked about a whole bunch of things. I don't even know how followable this is for somebody listening. It'll be so interesting to see.
Well, listen, it doesn't necessarily look. We're not giving a lecture here. We're throwing out a bunch of concepts for you, for listeners and viewers to consider. Because if you don't consider these things and wrestle with these things, then your only other option is to basically toe the party line, as they say. Toe the boundary line.
Keep living that life of getting by and not dying. Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem, as I see it, is I don't see a ton of thriving going on today. No. And so I'm trying to get to the heart of, why is there no thriving? And I think there's no thriving. Well, there's many reasons, but one of the big reasons here is no one trusts each other anymore. We believe the worst about people. Therefore, we set up boundaries, which only further isolates ourselves, continues to squeeze the life out of life, and make the world that should be this creative playground we should be playing, right? As creativity in action.
We should be playing.
Instead, we're hunkering down behind our boundaries and our trust issues and our trauma. And we're trying to make everyone in our life conform to what we need them to be and how we need them to be. And if they don't show up as that, well, then I can't trust that person. And smaller becomes our life. Yep. And that's where we are right now. And so I think you're seeing
COVID made it all so worse. That's just humans on fear. Humans on fear is everything you just said, right? And we're looking at how to train people how to be creators again. starting with themselves. It always
Yeah.
starts with yourself. And so it can't, and then you don't get to play the victim card, and you don't, but my mom didn't, I have a lot of sessions where I'm like, okay, cool. She didn't. And now you're 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now what? Now who,
Yeah, that was back in 1969.
And that's not like, you shouldn't feel that way. It's just like, okay, cool. That is true. And that happened. And now your self-esteem right now is up to you.
Yeah.
Who do you want to be? Make your behaviors match that, not from that gross discipline for same thing, same phenomenon. I don't trust myself, so I'm going to discipline and I'm going to this, and I have to force, and versus that entrainment of, if I call it being your own puppy, like taking care of your own human pet. You love your pet. You want them to have good food. If you take care of yourself like a pet, you're not going to have to be so rigid and create this well, don't eat this and don't eat. You're just like, give them healthy food, make sure they sleep, love in action, for self. And so, anyway, all of those things can be applied.
Well, it's interesting. I just want to comment on discipline, because we have, I believe, an errant concept of what discipline is. So what we think discipline are these sort of external restrictions that we place on ourselves. But see, the word discipline it's a derivative, and it's analogous to the word disciple. Okay.
Devotion
so discipline comes from disciple, and disciple means student or learner. So actually, when you're truly being disciplined is when, this is a little bit of a twist, but when you're truly free and liberated to follow the learnings, the awareness of the self. In other words, you are a follower of your true self. You are a disciple of yourself. And so to be disciplined means to be someone who can be flexible and fluid and flow with whatever's happening. And trust of self means I know I'll be okay, and will make a choice that is wholly integrated and in integrity with who I am. That's actually true discipline, not the arbitrary shit.
Absolutely. And that allows for, as a artist, creative person, I was like, screw the system and any sort of containment. I'm just like, no. And then spirit, because anyone who knows my story, like, learned energy work when I was 15, then worked with some shamanic mentors, but learning how to hear spirit, or life, or whatever you want to call it. It was, you need the riverbank. And this brings us back to our conversation. You need the riverbank for the river to flow. So what's the riverbank? Doing my lesson, doing my warm-ups, eating this, getting 8 hours of sleep. Like, how do I need to care for this human container in order to do the thing that I love to do? And so the boundaries are in order for the flow to flow, which is that healthy masculine feminine dynamic too. But that was a download I got, and it was so helpful, because then all of the structure in my life served the flow and served my being. It didn't mean so on Monday or yesterday, I was supposed to write this article at 9 a.m., intentionally, chainsaws across the street. And then they're like, it's just the most annoying sounds ever right there. And so am I going to write that article then? No. Right. So the discipline would say, well, you should, and you didn't keep your word. Like fake ontology is, well, you didn't keep your word. What's your integrity? That's fake ontology, right? It's the same. So it's about conditions in order for flow to be made possible, and then creating those conditions within your life and the physical reality and in your relationships. And then it's really fun. It's really this entire talk about blah, 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 blah is like, hey, how to have more fun and feel more powerful and wake up and not feel like, oh my God, I have to do all these things and live my life purpose and feel like so much stress.
Well, the hardest thing for a human being to do is nothing. And it is the most difficult thing, because the brain is this squirrely thing that now what? What's next? How do we plan for the crisis that's coming? What crisis? Well, I don't know. Let's find one, so there's always,
if you look for something wrong, you'll find it.
It's like, I always say to people, you have problems because you have time to have problems.
It's true.
like you're just in your nothingness, you have so much nothing time that you start finding all this stuff. And we do this with our partners and people we're in relationship with too. It's like,
well, that's the blaming, right? Oh, okay, something's wrong within me. Well, now I'm going to pick a fight with you. And that happens a lot too. But I mean, we could go forever down all of these down all these rabbit holes of like how this all goes. But I mean, really the takeaway is how back to what we were talking about in the beginning, the first one, self-relationship, look at our own beliefs, feel our own feelings, notice our thoughts, all of the tools that we talk about in order to have a sense of peace and trust and be able to live at choice in the really good, yummy way of like, oh, I get to. I also get to kind of suck at that or fail at that, like that unconditional love versus comparing and good and bad. Like that also feels like crap. These are the options people can. I use the word subscribe because it's easy. You unsubscribe and then I subscribe. Okay, I want more joy. Okay, what makes me feel more joyful? Okay, and then choose to do that. And then participate with creation by choosing to do that thing. And then you get to feel more joy. Like the mechanics of living with more joy is really everything we're talking about.
Yeah. And there's one thing you said there that I want to tune in on as well, which is let's be careful that we're not making our joy contingent on things outside of ourselves.
Yes.
Right. We can bring joy to the situation. So I was at we'll wrap up in a minute here, but I was at this dinner party last night and I walked in off the elevator and I see, the crowd. It was at a public place. And I thought to myself, well, this will be an interesting experiment. So I could choose to go in there and be one way. I could be very solemn and I could be serious and I could be professional and I could be all these different ways, right? So we're always at choice. So I actually took the moment before I walked in and I thought, who am I going to choose to be tonight, right? What aspect or attributes of my personality? And I thought, I'm going to play a game and experiment with, what if I show up just bringing joy into this group? And so everyone I'm talking to, I'm exuberant and I'm laughing and I'm complimenting and I'm conciliatory to, and I'm just making everyone feel good. So I played the game of making everyone feel good last night. Like I literally, and it's funny to see, or interesting is probably more accurate, to see how much in reaction people are. Like when you're standing in your power and you're choosing who you're going to be and you have that level of awareness, the rest of the world bends and orients around you. They don't even realize it, right? So when you get this, you can literally create the world to show up the way you want it to, because most people aren't getting this. So it really is powerful to stand in your own ability to bring joy, happiness, trust, all of these things that we've been talking about.
Without the manipulation. I'm just going to add, I'm like, and that will only work at the consciousness of play and joy and unity. People, the salesman thing, I'm like, do you want the blue car or do you want the silver car? Like where it's in order for him to benefit. We're talking about a world where that person's day has been brightened because you're like, I love that hat. But you're being authentic at the same time. It's not a manipulation. It's not coming from your mind. It's coming from this unity play and
when you get to that level.
Yes.
When you get to that level in yourself. And so I guess in wrapping up, and we'll probably talk about a lot of these things ongoing in different topics as they come up. It's a good foundation setting conversation. How do we understand trust? And so everyone listening can think about that. Like, what's your relationship to trust? Is it contingent on external things happening? Or is it something that because you have trust of self, you then exude trust to other people, right? And then what about your beliefs? What do you believe about your partner, the relationships that you're in? And are those beliefs coming from trauma, or are they coming from a free self-expression of creativity in terms of how you're relating to the person and the situation? And then choice, was the third one we talked about, realizing that we are always at choice. And if we're not at choice, the alternative is we're a victim. That's really it. We're either at choice or we're a victim. And victim doesn't need to be seen as like a negative, violent thing. It just means that you're allowing something outside of yourself to determine what's happening in your life. Any last words?
Other than trauma other than the beliefs don't always come from trauma. And we've already talked about this intergenerational programming, societal programming, cultural programming, just adding that the beliefs are going to filter in, and that your soul, if we go into that conversation, not to end on that, but like your everything that makes you you, that can all be used to your highest benefit. So all of that kind of like beliefs and limitations, all that kind of stuff is the ability to bring choice and consciousness to them. So you can go, oh, who do I want to be with that? Okay, this was a conditioning in my world. And now how do I want to be with that? So they're just not limited to trauma was the only thing.
I guess all of this can be summed up in one thing. For all of us, we all have our true naturalness.
Yes.
What is natural for us.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us have our naturalness, or at least our awareness of our naturalness, buried under years of conditioning.
Yes.
And so what's available to people is to start doing the work to remove that conditioning. It's like Michelangelo removing.
Yeah. Well, I call it like turning up the lantern so it falls away. Like you actually become more you, and then that which isn't you has to fall away.
Yeah.
So that would be what I leave with people with too. Like the authentic you isn't something you do, it's something you are. And we're giving you tools to either turn up the lantern so it burns off or rework some of these programs so you can use them to your nature.
All right, everyone. We'll have a nice light. We'll cadence this in such a way. We'll
talk about dominatrix trauma healing next time.
Yeah. Something a little. But I think these are important things to get out there and to talk about, because it's like if people don't re-relate, like almost like how am I going to re-up? How do I relate to this fresh? Because it just we get so buried in the way it gets talked about in the culture, and we rarely do we take the time to ask, well, what do I actually think about this stuff? So I think it's really important to cover. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We will see you on the next episode of the most important conversations about relationships, which Jen and I are doing every week. So until then, have a good life.
That concludes this episode of the Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at TMICglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.